in a heart. When love in the wilderness at last met Savitri, she goes in search of Vara. As ordained by her own father, you go out and see. She goes out, and when they meet for the first time in the forest, there is a very significant line written by Sri Aurobindo. Thus, Satyavan spoke first to Savitri. Why did he say that? It's a propriety. Otherwise, there is an Auchitya Bhangam, as we call it in our literary traditions. If the woman speaks first, there is an Auchitya Bhanga, the propriety, violation of propriety. So after so many lines describing their first meeting, Sri Aurobindo does not forget to add this one line. I was really surprised. Why did he write this one line, which doesn't appear to be very significant, but it is significant because that is where he protected the Auchitya. One sentence. Thus, Satyavan spoke first to Savitri. It's an unbroken tradition to maintain our Auchitya in Indian literature. Look at this Rasa Siddhi of their first meeting, Savitri and Satyavan in the forest. In a wide moment of two souls that meet, she felt her being flow into him as in waves a river pours into a mighty sea. This is physiological, in fact. This is realistic poetry, maybe surrealistic poetry. The description is so vivid, so physiological. I have been teaching physiology for the last 30-40 years. I see physiology. If someone asked me this morning, in fact, how is it possible to translate Savitri word by word, line by line? And I told him, as an example, do you have a word in your language for estrogen? Do you have? There are teachers here. How do you teach estrogen? You write in Telugu Lipi. Estrogen is a hormone, right? Estrogen is here. So I cannot write estrogen in Telugu Lipi and call it a kavya. So I used a word such as Vanita Rutadharmam. We have beautiful words in Sanskrit and Telugu which can be known. In fact, this is a superior to the words of other languages. Vanita Rutadharmam. Bhavaroga Karakamaina Vanita Rutadharmam anna. Estrogen. Estrogen Bhavaro Karakam ante kavitam avutunda? Avadu. Vanita Rutadharmam anna. Andukani. Then, after that meeting, she returns to the palace. What? 5 minutes? Oh, okay. I will try. Then after she returned, even before she returned to the palace, I am skipping a slide. Narada descended to the palace of Ashwapati. How he descended? He descended where arose King Ashwapati's palace to the winds in Madra, flowering up with delicate stone. You see, he is making you sit with Narada, and then you are descending to the earth along with Narada, and then you are seeing the stone palace rising up as though it is flowering. You see, you don't see the details first, isn't it? When you are far above, when you are coming down, as you are coming down and down, then it looks as if a flower is, there is a stone which is flowering. It's a beautiful description of the palace, Gomalankara. Then, very significantly, the king, Ashwapati, is there. By his side, queen is sitting. You know how queen behaved when Sage Narada came there? She got up suddenly. Isn't it normally happens? Here again he says, at his side, that was Ashwapati's side, a creature beautiful, passionate, wise, aspiring like a sacrificial flame. She got up. యావాగ్ని జ్వాలలే ఆమె పైకి లేచిందట. నారదుని చూసింది ముని, మర్యాద చూపెట్టాలి కదా. ఎలా లేచిందంటే దిగ్గున లేచిందట. యావాగ్ని జ్వాల. యాగం అంటే చాలా ఇష్టం వరందరు వారి. రెఫరెన్సెస్ ఆఫ్టర్ రెఫరెన్స్ కంపెనీ యాగ అగ్ని. యావాగ్ని జ్వాలవలే పైకి లేచింది అంటే నాకు చాలా అందంగా కనపడుతుంది. ఆస్పైరింగ్ ఫ్లేమ్, సాక్రిఫిషియల్ ఫ్లేమ్, యాగాగ్ని. కదా సాక్రిఫిషియల్ ఫ్లేమ్ అంటే ఎందుకు ఫ్లేమ్ అంటున్నాను? Because skyward from its earth seat through luminous air, Queen brought the human mother of Savitri. The human mother of Savitri also must be a flame. So, because she is the mother of Savitri, she also rises like Yakagni, flame. Only a flame can give birth to another flame. See, Arvind numbers of several lines that he must let you understand that Savitri is knowledge, power, beauty, representing all the knowledge. After the revelation of her short-lived marital bliss, what happens? Narada told the queen, she only can save herself and save the world. O queen, stand back from the stupendous sea. Come not between her and her hour of fate. Narada consoles, counsels, queen, don't come in between Savitri and the Lord Yama. She can take care of herself. She is going to save herself. She is going to save the humanity also. And Narada, Suvarnana, see here, he spoke and ceased and left the earthly scene immediately, swiftly. See his exit. See, Narada's arrival was elaborate. How the palace rises above into the air, although it is a flowering. But it will look like a bud when you are far above. Then it becomes a flower when you are coming nearer. It is elaborate, and the stotra of Lord Narayana is all elaborately described. But when the task is finished, all the great men have to disappear immediately. So when the seminar is over, I must not be seen here. If I have any claims to greatness. I don't have claims, so I am extending it by one more day. So that is what happens in our Puranas. All great people come, finish their job and immediately quit the place. They don't stay in one place. So similarly he describes, immediately he quit the place. And when Savitri wanted to go with her husband to the woods one day, she goes and seeks the permission of her mother-in-law. There is also a propriety, you see, and how Sri Aurobindo described it. Only the needed utterance passage found. All else she pressed back into her anguished heart and forced upon her speech an outward peace. She knew she was anguished. But when she goes to her mother-in-law and asks for permission, see, I have not seen the forest fully. So many flowers are there, so many trees are there, so much of beauty is there. I have not been having a chance. Shall I go now with my husband? You go, she says. Because we think you are goddess who came to serve us. I am skipping that also. But you know, the point is, the pagan scenes which are to come, they were all suppressed within Savitri, and outwardly, she doesn't want to make it known to the queen. How is the pagan scene is described when Satyavan fell. Grew aware they were no more alone. Savitri and Satyavan were enjoying, and with mirth and laughter they were conversing, they were going. But suddenly Satyavan fell down. She grew aware they were no more alone. Something had come there, conscious, vast, had died. Near her, she felt a silent shade, immense. Chilling the noon, with darkness for its back. An awful hush had fallen upon the place. There was no cry of birds, no voice of beasts, yet terror and an anguish filled the world. When Satyavan fell down, this is the scene. It creates a terror. In fact, this lingers in your mind. This Bhayanaka Rasa. You see, this again, it's Rasa Pochana through his poetry is being done so beautifully. The highest summit of Sri Aurobindo's poetic beauty is scaled and flagged in book 3. Now we come to the book 3. Part 3, I'm sorry, not book 3, part 3. Because I am only talking about part 1, part 2, part 3. But I am scanning all 24,000 lines, remember. O human craven to immortality, the death had to ask her, finally, after vehement arguments, like Ashok Kumar's old Hindi films, she will argue with the Yama. I was thrilled, in fact, I was recalling Ashok Kumar's court scenes, the way she argues with Lord. Oh, human claimant to immortality, because she claimed immortality. Reveal thy power, lay bare thy spirit's force, then will I give back thee Satyavan. Who are you? You are in mortal body. You are somebody else. Reveal yourself, and I will give back your son, Satyavan. The two oppose each other face to face. His being like a huge fort of darkness covered, around it her light grew, and ocean sea. Light like a burning tongue lit up his thoughts. Light was a luminous torture in his heart. Light coursed a splendid agony through his nerves. His darkness muttered, perishing in her blaze. Savitri is the blaze here. Death is the darkness, dark shadow, huge big shadow. That is the symbol and the legend that Sri Aurobindo used. He is not coming, see, on his Vahana. He is portrayed here as a huge big shadow, and Savitri comes out. She was a flame, but now she reveals her blaze. When there is such a big blaze, can there be a scope for shadow to remain anywhere? What a beautiful description of the perishing of death, symbolically. So when you realize that you are that light, you are that knowledge, you possess that knowledge, you are immortal. There is absolutely no place for death. And the dire universal shadow disappeared, vanishing into the void from which it came. And Satyavan and Savitri were alone. So you remember the scene he described first. They were alone. Then she realized that there is a third person. Now again the third person is gone. So, and Savitri, Satyavan and Savitri were now alone after the perishing of the darkness, the death. So this is, light is knowledge and power that we know, and I mentioned the Mundakopanishad. What is that knowledge by knowing which you need not know any other thing? There is no other knowledge to be gained, to be desired. This is the knowledge that Savitri imparts. It is not as though we are going to live here for 2000 years or 4000 cosmic years or something like that. We are already living. We are immortal through our mortality. She says, she tells Yama, she declares, we are immortals through our mortality. We only change. You remember that he mentioned death as a sleep and reconstituting sleep. What kind of sleep is that? Reconstituting sleep. So this is what Sri Aurobindo gave us through these 24,000 lives, and the humanity, I think, is indebted to him forever. And this is the Savitri, my translation. All okay, yeah, that's what yes, Dr. Andreddy has suggested that I should read a few lines. Now I will, maybe I think I will read something which I have not referred to. See, after the annihilation of death, Savitri and Satyavan returned to the earth. And how do they return? When they returned from above to the earth, what happened? How did he describe that happy scene of the return to the earth? Since I have not mentioned that, I thought I would read out some lines. Okay? Yeah. Appropriate lines. Bhutalamanam Punaragamanam. Cannot mention, repeat. అగాధముకు సమాధి నుండి ఆమె చైతన్యము మేల్కాంచినది. కొడవి జనని ప్రశాంతముకు అధశ్చేతన వక్షముపై ఆమె వాలియున్నది. హరిత తరచాఖలన్నీయు ఆమెపై వాలియున్నవి. సుమనోహరముగా ఆమె విదురుకు వారు కావలి కాసి. It was like a sleep for them. ఆ పైని నీలి రెక్కల పరవశ్యం ఒక్కటి కొమ్మ కొమ్మకు ఎగిరి వచ్చినది. కోలాహలకు పులిపునిచ్చినది. వనాంతరముల ఇంద్రజాలపు నిగూఢములు ఆవరించినవి, హరిత వర్ణ పత్రజాలముల నుండి దోబూచులాడినవి, ఆకాశము వర్ధకముగా అవళించినది, దినము కొరచైనది, నీడలు పొడవైనది, సాయంత్రపు శాంతిలో దినము చెదగీరుటకు ఉద్యమించినది, సజీవముకు సత్యవంతుని శరీరమును ఆమె తాకినది. సజీవముకు సత్యవంతుని శరీరమును ఆమె ఇప్పుడు తాకినదన్నమాట. ఆమె దేహమున మాటలకందరి ఆనందము నిండినది. ఆమె అంకమున అతని శరము హర్షాతిరేకముల బరువు అయినది. హర్షాతిరేకముల బరువట ఆయన శరీరం. ఆమె స్థలమధ్యము సంతసముల శ్రమతో వెచ్చని ఊపిరుల పీల్చుకున్నది. ఆమె అంగాంగమున హర్షాతిరేకము మేల్కాంచినది. అతని బాహువులందు ఆమెకు సుర్లోకపు బరువు అనుభవైక విద్యమైనది. అతని స్పర్శయందు సర్వానుగ్రహములు పిలుపునిచ్చినవి. ఆమె జీవన పర్యంతము అతని చేతలతో ముడిపడి ఉన్నది. అతని ఆలింగనమున ఆమె రూపుదాల్చిన ఆనందమైనది. ఆమె బృహత్తర సమాధి యొక్క అంతమైనది. ఆమె మరల మత్స్యకాంత అయినది. భూలోకపు సావిత్రి అయినది. ఇదివరకు పైన ఉండేది అమ్ముడితో అర్థం చేస్తుంది. భూలోకపు సావిత్రి అయినది. భూతలములకు అందరి శక్తులు ఆమె ఆత్మను ఆవరించినవి. సుర్లోకమునకందరి నిశ్చల ఆనందములాగా హృదయమున దాగి ఉన్నవి. తలపలకందరి కాంతులు, భూతల ఉద్వేగములకందరి అనురాగములు ఆమె మానసాకాశముందు ప్రత్యక్షమైనవి, ప్రకాశించినవి. ఆమె ఆత్మ జలధులందరి సంతసముల నింపినవి. దివ్యమైనవన్నీయు ఆమె చెంతకు చేరినవి. దైవ సదృశము ఆమె ప్రశాంత చిత్తమును చేరుకున్నది. బృహత్తరము నిశ్శబ్ద స్వరమొక్కటి తలపులో ఊపిరుల పీల్చుకున్నది. కాలమును స్థలమును ఆక్రమించిన సమస్త వస్తు సంచయములు ఆమె సొంతమైనవి. ఆమె ఎందే సంచరించినవి, నివసించినవి ఆమెయే అయినవి. జగతి సమస్తము ఆమె ఆశ్రయము పొందినది. సమస్తము ఆమె అనురాగపు ఆలింగనములకే సృష్టింపబడినది. ఆమె చైతన్యం ఇప్పుడు స్థలము నుండి కాలము నుండి ముక్త అయినది, అపరిమితమైనది. అసంఖ్యాక వత్సరములు క్షణములైనవి. అసంఖ్యాక వత్సరములు క్షణములైనవి. ఆది మధ్యాంతరహితుని కాంతులీను కొరలైనవి. భూతలమున ఆమె ఉదయములు రెక్కలు విప్పుకున్నది, హంగములైనవి. సో ఇలాగా now one thing that I want to mention, last point is there is a story beautifully told throughout these 24,000 lines. But the only thing is, he goes on discussing the philosophical aspects, which I have not touched. I cannot. Unless you read through those lines, you will not get that realization that you are immortal. That is why he even repeats many things. See how we categorize things into that and this label, and then spend all our time in discussions. Shushka Churchill. There is only one point you should know, that you are immortal. We are immortals. Say you are immortals. Thank you very much.
I aspire with all my being for thy reign as sovereign and master of my mind and heart and body. Let them be the docile instruments and the faithful servitors. Supreme Lord, eternal truth, let us obey thee alone and live according to it. O sweet Mother, thou art the light of my intelligence, the purity of my soul, the quiet strength of my vital, the endurance of my body. I rely on thee alone and want to be entirely thine. Make me surmount our single sin. Oh, yes. ముందుగా నన్ను ఈ స్థానంలో కూర్చోబెట్టింది సావిత్రి. నేను కనుక సావిత్రిని ట్రాన్స్లేట్ చేసి ఉండకపోయినట్లయితే ఒకసారి ఈ స్థానంలోకి వాళ్ళు పెట్టేది కాదు. ఆనందరెడ్డి గారి డైనింగ్ హాల్లో బాగుంది ఇచ్చారు. మీరు ఈ సెషన్కి డిసైడ్ చేయాలి. ఐ నెవర్ ఎక్స్పెక్టెడ్ దట్ ఐ మస్ట్ డిసైడ్ హియర్. సో ప్రజల నుంచి చాలా హైలీ క్వాలిఫైడ్ అండ్ హైలీ ఎడ్యుకేటెడ్, హైలీ లెర్న్డ్ డాక్టరేట్స్ అండ్ ప్రొఫెసర్స్ స్పీచెస్ మీరు విన్నారు. ఇప్పుడు ఒక సామాన్య భక్తుడు మదరెంట్ శరణుల వల్ల చంద్రులైన ప్రేమ, విశ్వాసం, భక్తి ఉన్నటువంటి మనిషి మాట్లాడేదాన్ని మీరు అనుకుంటున్నారు. కృష్ణ రామకృష్ణ గారు సాహిత్యంలో ఉండేటటువంటి పొయిటిక్ బ్యూటీని చాలా అర్థవంతంగా, అందంగా, చక్కగా వర్ణించారు. సాహిత్యంలో మన జీవితంలో ఎన్ని ఆస్పెక్ట్స్ అయితే మనం చూస్తున్నామో అన్ని ఆస్పెక్ట్స్ సాహిత్యంలో ఉన్నాయి. ఎవరైనా ఏ దృక్పథం నుంచి కనుక సాహిత్యం చూశారంటే ఆ దృక్పథంలో అతన్ని సచ్చిదానంద వరకు తీసుకుపోయేటటువంటి గుణం సాహిత్యంలో. నేను బేసికల్గా ముందుగా నేను ఇంట్రడక్షన్ అన్నప్పుడు బయోడేటా ఇవ్వనప్పుడు ఇంజనీర్, ఎలక్ట్రికల్ ఇంజనీర్ అని మొట్టమొదటిగానే నేను ఒక లైన్ ఇచ్చాను. దానికి కారణం ఏంటంటే నేను చూసేది ప్రాక్టికల్ సైడ్ ఆఫ్ శ్రీ అరబిందోస్ యోగా. Because I am an engineer, I must work, I must get result. నాకు మిగతా పెద్దగా పట్టవు. ప్రతి బ్యూటీ ఉంది, ఇంకా చాలా బ్యూటీస్, చాలా లోతులు సాహిత్యంలో ఉన్నాయి. బట్ how it helps us to raise from the normal consciousness to the level of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. We are sons of God and must be given as He. That what Sri Aurobindo says. They are sons of God and must be even as He. Even as He. So, మనం ఇప్పటిదాకా కూడా మనం విన్నది ఏమిటంటే దేవాది ఉత్తముడు, నే పాతకున్నాను. ఇదే మనం విన్నది. మనకి చివరిలో నూరికి వస్తుంది. లేకపోతే ఈ జీవితం బుద్ధుల ప్రాయం, బ్రహ్మసత్యం, జగన్మిథ్య. ఇది మనకి తెలిసింది. జీవితం చివరికి ఏమవుతుంది? మోక్షంలో పర్యవేక్షిస్తుంది. ఇది మనకి తెలిసింది. కానీ మదరెంట్ శ్రీ అరబిందో భూమి మీదకి వచ్చిన తర్వాత దే హావ్ ఓపెన్డ్ అనదర్ వే ఫర్ ది హ్యూమన్ సోల్స్ టు పాస్ ఆన్, నాట్ టు మేజ్ ఇన్ సంథింగ్ ఎల్స్. బికాస్ ద మెర్జింగ్ itself is the final goal or destiny of the human consciousness or human being. This so much organization is not necessary and there is no need of coming us to earth from above. Because we are free and we are already liberated in the divine. Why should we come onto the earth? Is there any purpose of our coming? We have to see this purpose inside. It is there in every life. First of all, I started reading Savitri and thought some lines are very important. I noted down separately. Then second reading, some more lines added to that. And third reading, final reading. Now I am not able to leave even a single sentence which is unimportant in Savitri. That is Savitri. So Savitri raises the human consciousness to the supramental consciousness or above that. There is no end. Because Sri Aurobindo says at one place, the God is infinite, so his manifestation also must be infinite. So where is the end? There is no end. So then what comes after human beings? We say human beings are the highest and the ladder of evolution. But beyond that, we don't know. Nobody has told us except Sri Aurobindo. They told us you have to make the upwards in the Brahman. But Sri Aurobindo says no, not to make you have come here. You have to bring down, to raise the world to God in deathless life, to bring God down to the world and earth we came. Not only Mother and Sri Aurobindo, we also came to only for that purpose. We also came for that purpose, to bring God down to the world and earth we came. What is the purpose of nature? Why is nature so much organized today on the earth? What is the purpose of nature? To catch the boundless in an act of birth, to catch the spirit into physical form, to lend speech and thought to the ineffable, to find new bodies to the infinite and images to the unimaginable. This is the purpose of nature. Because we are part and parcel of our nature, so this is the purpose of ours also. So this is what Savitri says to us, and I am very much grateful to Mr. Ananda Reddy to have this honor to sit here, and to not capable of complimenting or commentating on Sri Ramakrishna Ayya's speech. So thank you, Ananda.
Thank you, sir. I'm afraid we have no time for question and answers because sir has mesmerized us with the poetry and has created a different poetic mood. So I don't think we want to disturb it with questions and answers. And our Professor Madhusudan Reddy had written that Savitri is the Mahakavya and the Mahavakya. And sir has told us, and that not only in English, of course English he has made it mantric, but beautifully translated in Telugu also, although I don't follow Telugu, but sir has translated it quite musically with all dhwani and auchitya vichar and everything he has taken into consideration and done that. The entire rasas, all the 12 rasas are there. So I'm sure it's a treat for all our audiences here to hear poetry. And moving on to the next paper presenter here, Professor Makalan Paranspe, who would be speaking on I think a philosophical aspect and a vision of Sri Aurobindo. Professor Paranspe, the chairperson, Center for English Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, joined the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign campaign, from where he first got his MA degree in English literature and subsequently a PhD in 1985 on the topic Mysticism in Indian English Poetry. He has published over 150 academic papers and over 40 books. He edited the Penguin Sri Aurobindo Reader and the Spirit's Manifest Home Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. His latest books include The Death and After Death of Mahatma Gandhi, London and New York Routledge publication 2014, and Making India, Colonialism, National Culture and Indian English Authority, Dorset Springer 2013. Professor Paranspe will be giving us essentially Sri Aurobindo's vision of the future in his talk Surpassing Man, Supramental Manifestation and Sri Aurobindo as the Futurist of the Supreme. We have our familiar face, the speaker in the morning, now the chairperson, Professor Sachidanand Mohanty. Welcome, sir. Welcome once again to the day. I request Professor Paranspe to.
Thank you very much, Shruti. My friend, Professor Sachidanand Mohanty, the chair, learned co-speaker, Professor Ramakrishna, and friends. It's a great privilege to be here. I was reluctant to assume this privilege and this honor. As I told Anand Bhai when he wrote to me, I said, "Ye mere bas ka nahi hai. You've made me a speaker to talk about Sri Aurobindo's vision of the future." And he said, no, I don't want to hear all this, you have to come. So thank you, Anand Bhai, for that command, that loving command. I want to thank the entire Reddy family because we see in them a very inspiring example of the unity and togetherness that we lack today in our contemporary society, not just abroad but in India. I want to begin, perhaps it would be customary to begin with a tribute to Professor Reddy, though you will hear many such tributes tomorrow. I only met him one or two times, and yesterday was his birthday. And when I went up to the Samadhi, I really felt his presence. So I thought I should share an anecdote with you about my encounter with Professor Reddy. I first met him in a conference at Osmania University, and I was introduced to him as a professor of philosophy. And he met me, he had a few words with me, and then he told Sachi to bring me to his house. So I'm grateful to Sachi for that. Sachi has done a lot of things for me. One of the big things he did was, of course, that, I had worked on Sri Aurobindo as a graduate student in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I wrote 2 chapters on his work, on his poetry, on Savitri and also on his collected poems. But I had never been to Pondicherry. I didn't know anything about, the whole experiment in consciousness that had taken place in that laboratory called the Aurobindo Ashram, and later, of course, in Auroville. And it was fortuitous, or it was a part of a bigger design, that Sachi joined the Central University of Hyderabad English Department a few months after me, about a year after me. And we got to talk, and we realized that we had so many common interests. And when he said that, when he heard that I had done a PhD on mysticism in Indian English poetry, I read Sri Aurobindo, and I had a few experiences also. He very, should I say, subtly and silently pointed me towards Pondicherry. He said, Makaran, you have to go there, you have to go there, you have to go there. That happened much later, but before that I met Professor Reddy, so I want to give you that anecdote. So he told Sachi for some reason, bring this fellow over to my house. So we were sitting there, near, it's a small room and 2 cane chairs with the train, passing at the back. I still remember that day very vividly. And Sachi went to pay his respects to Auntie Ji inside. And he started talking to me. And he talked to me as if he knew me, and I was very surprised. And I said, but sir, you've not met me. This is, we just met for a few seconds earlier. He said, Makaran, what you see in front of you with your eyes and what you know with your mind is very small. It's like the tip of the iceberg. And he told me, we have met many times, you don't know all that. And I was really startled because it reminded me of the famous lines in the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna asked Krishna that you say that you were before Ikshvaku and all that, but I don't remember all this. So Krishna says, you don't remember, but I remember. So Professor Reddy treated me like an old acquaintance and a friend. And then he said, now we have to go upstairs. So then we went upstairs. The Samadhi looked different. Yesterday Anand Bhai explained to me. It was done by him later in a different pink color. But in those days it was different. And I sat there with him. And it was a wonderful experience. So you will hear wonderful things about Professor Reddy tomorrow. But I will tell you that he was a clairvoyant. He had occult knowledge. He was not merely a philosopher of the mind. He was a person of deep spiritual experience and insight. And Sachi and I were talking about this, and Mother chose her instruments very carefully. I've written a little book on the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, and I studied how the Mother charmed Surendranath Johar, Fakir, to give up his entire property, and now the beautiful institution in Delhi. My daughter studied there both in Mirambika and then in Mothers International. But so the Mother chose her instruments very carefully, and some she chose for their own personal sadhana. They were not meant to do anything, including great people like Nalini Kanta Gupta. And some she chose because they would carry on a parampara, they would build institutions. So Professor Reddy was like that, and today Anand Bhai, the chairman of your trust, is carrying on in that tradition. And Chalamai was also a student at Central University, Hyderabad. I still remember sitting in on her MPhil with the great Shishir Kumar Das from Aurobindo Bhavan in Shantiniketan had come as an expert, and I took him to the station, So these were times I remember. And beautiful times we had at Sakar. And this morning, the way Deepshikha Di started the day, I told her this was the best part of the day. And she said, Makarand, you speak so nicely, how is it all your wives are leaving you? You know, I have 2 wives, I divorced the first one, or she divorced me. Then I married again and she has also left me. And I have 2 children from 2 different women, okay? She said, if you talk so sweetly, Makarand and all, but you know, I'm also very blunt. So I told her, yours was the best part of the day. Now I'm telling it in front of others, including my fellow speakers. So obviously they'll say, this fellow has no tact, you know, he says whatever he feels like. So please, I beg you to forgive me, sir, you were both very brilliant. But what Didi did this morning was, you know, she took us to that realm of the mother, you know, all Shwet, all white, and the form as Savitri, the white lotus. It was so beautiful. Anyhow, so Anand Bhai, please allow me one more little aside before I start on my talk. You know, when you sent me this, I was very excited. 4 aspects of Sri Aurobindo. And I said, Anand Bhai is actually referring to the mother by Sri Aurobindo. So 4 aspects of the mother, the 4 powers of the mother that Sri Aurobindo writes about. Let us bring them to mind, you know. What are these 4 aspects? The signal powers, I'm quoting Sri Aurobindo, signal powers and capacities needed to bring about the completeness of earthly evolution. These are the 4 powers of the mother. One is her calm personality, and you know, it goes on. I wish we could read, but time is limited, and he follows mother's discipline. So Shruti is sitting here, at 40 minutes she's going to pinch me and say, okay, now you wind up, and you must do that. So anyhow, because we want to listen to Anand Bhai, and he said something very important in the morning. I'm going to mention that and then I'll start. But 4 aspects of Sri Aurobindo correspond to 4 powers of the mother. Maheshwari, then Mahakali, we heard it earlier, Mahalakshmi and Mahasaraswati, right? So these great wisdom, strength, harmony and perfection, you know, the vibhutis of the mother, Sri Aurobindo wrote about, chapter 6 of the mother. And if you look at these 4 aspects that Anand Bhai has brought to our notice in this 2-day meeting, again they are in some ways, you know, reminiscent of those 4 aspects of the mother. You know, Sri Aurobindo as the Mahakavi, then Sri Aurobindo as the Mahabhavishyaka, the envisioner of the future. Then, of course, Sri Aurobindo as this great a social revolutionary transformer. So Maha Samajik, we don't have such a word, you know, but we have to think about these, you know, 4 aspects of, you know, Sri Aurobindo. And the 4th one is the Mahadarshanik, the great philosopher yogi about whom Anand Bhai is going to tell us. So, I just wanted to say one more little thing. What he told us in the morning. Why is Sri Aurobindo difficult? Because he makes demands on us. And the demand is not just to do some ritual, you know, you come here, you put some garland. All of this is important. But you have to continuously remember who you are. You have to continuously live in the spirit. You can't live just in the mind or the body or the vitals. And Anand Bhai reminded us of that today, and it's a very tall order because we are all very ordinary people, and as soon as the food comes, we stop thinking. You know? That's our programming, you know, like Pavlov's dogs, you know, that the bell rings and the dog salivates. We're like that. And we are all like that. I'm not saying you and I. We are all creatures of programming, conditioning. But what Sri Aurobindo and the mother said is, listen, you can change your program. You can change, you can reprogram yourself. And this is what I'm going to talk about, this reprogramming a little bit in the time that I have. Yeah, thank you. So, okay, what I'm proposing to do today in the rest of my talk is to go over certain things that Sri Aurobindo wrote about the future. okay? And I'm concerned mostly with the idea of the supramental manifestation. Now, most of you are teachers here at this school, and you might have heard these words many times, supramental. What is all this? And in your mind you must be at times very skeptical also. What is all this stuff? So let's talk about this stuff a little bit, okay? And if you have a few minutes, if you have any questions, we can talk about it. So there is one volume of the collected works, volume 13, which is a very good volume to look at, to read again and again when we look at this record of yoga of Sri Aurobindo's, where he discovers the supermind. In fact, if you read the complete works, he starts mentioning the supermind only around 1914, though he has had the experience in Alipur jail, okay? He's had, the four great experiences and transformations of Sri Aurobindo is written about, but so he had some inkling, and when you think about what happened in Alipur jail, he really explicitly says in the evening talks that Vivekananda came to him and he showed him all those levels of consciousness above the mind. Anyhow, the point is, even if he had discovered the supermind before 1914, he starts talking about it only around 1914. And in this volume, you see the entire record, okay? And then there are these wonderful essays on the Superman, which were published in the Arya. So there is one bunch of stuff that we can look at, his essays on the Superman. He starts with Nietzsche and talks about how his own idea of the Superman is different. And then those wonderful essays in the Bulletin of Physical Education. These are the things I want to concentrate on today. Now these were some of the last things Sri Aurobindo wrote. In fact, he dictated them in the last months of his life, just as he was finishing Savitri. It's unfinished. Savitri is not finished, okay? There is an unfinished canto. But so these 6 essays that he wrote in the Bulletin of Physical Education, the mother actually requested him to do that. She gave a great emphasis to physical education because she considered it very important for evolution. And she requested Sri Aurobindo to send a message, to write something in that bulletin. And he wrote this series of essays, which we should look at if possible, and I want to touch upon them. But before that, we have to remember that, this session, my talk is about Sri Aurobindo as the futurist of the Supreme. That's how I have titled it. He is not just a futurist, because actually future studies is a discipline now. Futurology. The Germans use that word futurology. H.G. Wells, H.G. Wells, the famous writer, The War of the Worlds, and so many books he wrote. He was a science fiction writer. The Time Machine. Yes, you heard about The Time Machine? So H.G. Wells, around the turn of the century, he started thinking about future studies because, there was a moment. There was Stella de Chardin, there were other people, there was a man called Jean Gebser. They were all thinking about evolution in a different way. Not just evolution of the physical, or physiological, or material, but evolution from a spiritual point of view, okay? And they were all thinking that we must play a role in the future. The future is going to be co-scripted by us. We are not going to be merely, subjects of the future. We will have a bit of choice. So the next phase in evolution, it won't be blind evolution. It won't be merely nature working itself out in instinct, but nature in partnership with us. And what Sri Aurobindo and the mother tried to do is they tried to change the hard wiring of nature. They tried to, as it were, request nature that, listen, please help. It's like asking Maya, don't do your job of deluding us, but become a Vidya Maya, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say. There is Avidya Maya and there is Vidya Maya. If you go to Avidya Maya, it's terrible. But Vidya Maya is very important because that is also kind of Maya, as the great Isha Upanishad says. Both Vidya and Avidya are both Maya. Okay? But no, you can't say that in your school, okay? Otherwise you'll be out of your job. But ultimately even Vidya is a big trap. because you think you know but you don't know. The ultimate reality is not cognizable in the normal sense. And that's why Sri Aurobindo used words like the Gnostic being, the mind of light. In these last essays, he comes up with a new term, the mind of light. In all his writings, you don't find it. See how innovative he is. In the last few months of his life, he's coming up with something new. So we must also, as Aurobindonians, we must also rethink Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. It's not enough just to repeat everything, the same old doesn't help. That's a different matter. But perhaps Anand Bhai is better, more equipped, more fit to say that than me. I shouldn't talk in front of my seniors about these matters. But we are all trying to, take this Aurobindonian project forward through some major rethinking of premises. That is very required now, In the West, they are not so hesitant to do it because deconstruction, creative deconstruction is important for any new creation. New creation means you have to destroy something. You don't have to do it violently necessarily. You don't have to do it with an intent, some kind of political intent, right? To put somebody down. Like some people, they say in Pondicherry are trying to stage a coup. They want to take over the ashram. So we are not interested in all that. But some rethinking is really required. But that's a different matter. So what I'm saying is future studies is a discipline and it has many ingredients to it, because as Sachi Bhai said a little while back, the new paradigm of thinking is not segmented, it's not analytical, but it is synthetic. Synthetic in the sense of how Sri Aurobindo says the synthesis of yogas. Synthetic means bringing together, integral. Because by and large the paradigm of science is reductionism and analysis and separation. We have a scientist here, I won't speak too much about the scientific methodology, but if you look at the rise of modern science is based on isolating questions or problems and then applying the scientific method in controlled conditions so that you produce predictable knowledge, reliable knowledge. Okay? There is evidence-based thinking. And one aspect of futurology was actually about that. It was about probability. Out of many possible outcomes, which outcome is more probable? Right? So all of you are sitting here and at 5 o'clock or 5:15, when you go home, it is probable that most of you will go home, right? So it's probability. Some may go to shopping also, and some people may say, my God, what a headache. Let's go and see a movie. We listen to loud music and we'll become mindless for some time. That's also possible. So you see, there's probability studies, but now what people are saying is that there is not one future. We're talking about futures. So the futures are opening up. And there are many world theories in quantum and other things where there are many possible worlds simultaneously, and we're just in one of those worlds. There are a million other such seminar rooms, and there the speaker is saying something slightly different, the audience is doing something slightly different. So of these infinite possibilities, one is being actualized here today. So these are things to think about. But Sri Aurobindo and his massive futurology, of which we've heard 2-3 things already, you see, because he's already talking about the human cycle, the ideal of human unity, he's talking about globalization, he's talking about world government long before these things are a reality. He was already thinking through these things, okay? But we are concentrating, at least in this talk, mostly on his idea of the supramental manifestation. So what is this supramental manifestation? For all those who are puzzled, supermind simply refers to a higher kind of mind than we possess. The supermind is the intermediary between the absolute. The absolute in the Vedic sense was Sat Chit Ananda. And then there is this world. This world is a manifestation of Sat Chit Ananda, right? That's why the Upanishads say that this is the Ashwata tree with the roots in the sky and the branches down. Because our origin is up there. Though we live here, our true being is somewhere else, because our true being is spirit. We are spirit born, right? And we forget that, and we get entangled in matter so much. Similarly, that entanglement is the involvement of the divine in matter. So without evolution, you can't have evolution. So this is a great thing that Sri Aurobindo said. In fact, Vivekananda also said it, because this comes from the Upanishadic idea that the world doesn't come out of nothing. You see, the Big Bang doesn't make sense, because what does the Big Bang come from? Something can't come out of nothing, so etc., etc. But modern science doesn't accept some of these things, but we don't have to be concerned with that for the time being. So what Sri Aurobindo is saying is that there is this intermediate stage called the supramental level of consciousness, where manifestation is beginning, creation is beginning. It is potent. In other words, it has power to manifest. But it doesn't have error. See, our mind is full of error. It's error prone, because the serpent and the rope, in our classical thing. We get afraid, we look at the serpent, we look at the rope and we think it's a serpent. And sometimes it's actually a serpent and we think it's a rope and we get bitten. And then when we're in the hospital we recover, Hopefully if there's vaccine. That's my story, it's not the other story of the rope being mistaken. I think, this is not a serpent, it's only the rope. And I put my hand there, then I get bitten. Anyhow. But that's error. You see, the mind is error prone. So Sri Aurobindo said the supermind does not have that divisive and error prone tendency. So let me just sum up, for you, some of the qualities of the supermind that we don't know. But who has done it? I'll give you the source. I'm a scholar, I'm supposed to give you the source. So the Mother Service Society has made a little chart. And I'm going to read from it. It's useful. You don't have to take it as the gospel truth, but it's something to alert you and make the mind open up to something up and beyond the mind. So what does the mind do? The mind divides. The supermind unites. So wherever you see people dividing, you have to be a bit suspicious. Okay? Because some politics is at play. But wherever people are trying to bring people together, you see, and they say it's okay, you have a beard and a skull cap, but it's okay, you and I are one. That bringing together, okay? Dividing, the mind divides, the supermind unites. The mind can lose itself in itself. Because the mind is like a monkey. You get completely sidetracked. As I'm sure I'm going to get sidetracked, and then Shruti will have to say, listen, you're forgetting your topic, right? So mind can lose itself in itself. But the supermind, being self-existent and whole, cannot thus lose itself. The mind is the creator in a way and the creature of ignorance. But the supermind possesses knowledge, and it possesses certain knowledge. It has no doubts. The mind is full of doubts. At the supramental level, there are no doubts, because it's knowledge by identity. You see it so clearly, like that Sastamlakam, that Nyaya, the Myrobalan in the palm of the hand. You don't need mental gymnastics, you know it, right? Then the mind acts by thought that understands by difference. The supermind knows by vibration of unity, even between will and knowledge. So it's like that. When you are in the presence of somebody who knows, your mind becomes very quiet. You don't have to talk. There's an ancient legend of Dakshinamurti and all these old sages that have been doing the work of creation, and they were aging, and they said, listen, our dad, Brahma, is a very clever fellow. He got us entangled in all this, and now we are old and dying and we haven't found the truth. And then they see this youth of 16 facing southwards, a very shining, flaming appearance. And they sit around him and they're enlightened. They don't have to talk, because it's a vibration, you see. Words are not necessary. So obviously, you see, I have no access to the supermind, because I would have been quiet and all of you would have been enlightened. And instead, I'm chattering about 19 to the dozen, which means I'm very much in the mind. Anyhow, so the supermind works through a kind of vibration of unity. the mind can think of itself and is incapable of knowing the other. This is also a very beautiful point, you know. You measure, you quantify, but you still don't know the other. Now, many of you are in close relationships, you know, parents, husband, wife, children, and you think you know them very well, but you don't know them at all. We don't know our partners at all. You know, these are some amazing things because we only know ourselves and we project ourselves onto the other. You have to think about it. But the supermind knows the other as itself. So if you can unite with someone at the level of the spirit, then that's an unbreakable bond because you're not uniting in the normal way. And that's the union of Satyavan and Savitri we heard today. It's very silent. They just meet each other and how being flows into him. You know, like the river surging into the ocean, and then he speaks. So speech follows. Here we chatter, and still we don't know each other. But so to know the other as yourself is something totally amazing because they're not other anymore. They're just yourself. The supermind acts because of the real. It knows the real, like the Platonic real, the idea. It is possessed of the idea. But the mind only acts mentally. Now again, the supermind knows the infinite and knows the finite as an aspect of the infinite. You see, so from the supramental, whenever you see anything limited, that limitation is only a version of the unlimited. So it doesn't see limitation anywhere, it doesn't see division. So you may see hundreds of people in this room, but there are not hundreds of people. I can assure you there's one consciousness with different filters, you know, so things like that. Whereas from the mental, we see everybody as different. You get my point? Because we only see the limited, we don't see the unlimited. But the limited is only a front, you know, a mask of the unlimited. Then the mind is bound by space and time, but the supermind is simultaneously of time and the timeless, and it is in space and beyond space. So you know, these are, I mean, I could actually, you know, multiply all this, but we don't have that much time. But this was just to give you a sense of what Sri Aurobindo meant by the supramental. And the theory, or the point that he was trying to make, is that this supramental consciousness will be available to all of us because it will take root on earth. And this is the whole project of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So, in a sense, when you think about Sri Aurobindo as the futurist of the Supreme, you see what you mean by that, essentially. What is meant by that is that Sri Aurobindo was the person who was going to establish, he and the Mother were going to establish the supramental consciousness on earth. And let us, I've spoken for exactly 30 minutes, I have 15 minutes more. So, let me just quote you two things. You know, the Mother trained with an occultist called Max Thion, and as early as 1906, and this passage has been printed, was actually published in a French journal called Cosmic Review around 1906, and I think Alok Pandey, who lives in Pondicherry, has quoted it in the book, The Mother, the Birth and Growth of a Flame. Professor Ramakrishna. The book is like The Birth and Growth of a Flame. So this
Banerjee.
hasn't, no, Anurag has published it, I think.
No,
But
it's his book.
is his book?
Yeah.
It's not Alok Pandey's book? Okay, thank you for the
I get the
correction.
title after.
Oh,
The title man.
the entitled and the title. So, thank you for that correction, because I think I got it from, anyhow, but you see, this is what the Mother wrote in 1906. Wherever there is beauty, wherever there is radiance, wherever there is progression towards perfection, be it in the heaven high up or down in the depths, everywhere there is assuredly the being in the form and likeness of man. Man, the supreme terrestrial evolver. Think about this, 1906, before she had met Sri Aurobindo in the physical. Yeah? And look at Sri Aurobindo's statement, man is a transitional being. So the idea is that there is something beyond man. And this is why I call Sri Aurobindo the futurist of the supreme, because he's showing us the pathway to what is beyond the human, basically, right? And I would also like to take you to two important dates, okay? One is the 24th of November 1926, okay? And that is the day, I mean, it's been called Immortality Day, it has different, it's a Darshan Day even today in the ashram. So, Siddhi Day. But that was the day when it said the descent of the overmind into the physical, the day of Krishna, and Datta, Dorothy Hodgson, she made this very inspired proclamation. She said that, and Sri Aurobindo called it the gorgeous proclamation. And she says, the Lord has descended into the physical today. And this is what Champak Lal, who was of course Sri Aurobindo's attendant, he recorded it, he remembered it and wrote it. Krishna the Lord has come, he has ended the hell of suffering, he has conquered pain, he has conquered death, he has conquered all, he has descended tonight, bringing immortality and bliss. Then Nalinida also, who was present in the ashram, he recalled Datta saying, the Lord has descended, he has conquered death and sorrow, he has brought down immortality. Okay? So this is Siddhi Day, 24th November of 1926. This is, and then I think 26th was observed as the immortality. 26th November was observed as Immortality Day. By the way, there was for a while the feeling that death would not come to the ashram. And there's a whole story about how somebody died. Some sadhaks died, somebody's wife died, and then other people died. I think President Woodrow Wilson's daughter, Nishtha. So people had to revise those earlier hopes they had. And then Sri Aurobindo, of course, said it very clearly. He said it, and I'll quote him so that we don't get sidetracked, because this is not about physical immortality, okay? So sometimes we get very caught up in that because it's an exciting idea. We want to live forever. Ageless body, timeless mind, as Deepak Chopra says. But how you're going to live, they don't focus on. You want to live the same way that you lived when you were 16 and 24. Pointless living that way all your life, right? Anyhow, even if you're living 900 years, if you live as stupidly as that, then having a long life doesn't really help. Anyhow, so this is what Sri Aurobindo said when Nirodha asked him directly. He said, conquest of death is something minor, and as I've always said, the last physical result of it meaning the supramental descent, or the supramental transformation. Not the first result of all or the most important. The first is to put spiritual values in place, okay? So we have to put spiritual values. This is what Sri Aurobindo says. The conquest of death is not the first thing. But according to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, if the supramental manifestation does take place, then death is not compulsory. Okay? Death is a bad habit. And this habit can be changed according to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I'm going to talk about that at the end of my talk. I'll come to that again. So this is one important date that we should think about. And the other important date is 29th of February 1956, when the Mother announced the manifestation of the supramental upon earth is no more a promise but a living fact, a reality. It is at work here, and one day will come when the most blind, the most unconscious, even the most unwilling shall be obliged to recognize it. Now, so between these two dates, right, between the 24th of November 1926 and the 29th of February 1959, something happened. And actually my interest is in that. What is it that happened? And the key to what happened, or the key to it is what Sri Aurobindo writes in that series of essays called the Supramental Manifestation. Now, we don't have too much time to go into all of it, or even skim its surfaces, but in the next 2-3 minutes I'm going to talk about a few highlights. And Sri Aurobindo starts those essays by talking about the importance of physical education, of sportsmanship, of discipline, of following the leader, of learning how to lose and win, as being training for life. And we see that even today in cricket or, in football. I can't elaborate, there's not too much time. So he starts on something very simple and basic. The importance of sports, what it teaches you, how important it is to follow the leader, to work together for a common goal, to accomplish something, how important it is to train the body, to accept defeat, to accept victory with equanimity, with equalness. So he starts that. He starts that and slowly builds up, and he says the perfection of the body is very important, because in traditional spiritual practices, often the body was considered an obstacle, except in Hatha Yoga. In many traditions, they said the body is unreal, it's made of the elements that's going to dissolve. So the idea is to somehow transcend the body. And the body is like an irritant, right? But here, you have to perfect the body. And then Sri Aurobindo talks about the obstacles to that perfection. He talks about food. He says as long as you need food, animal food, the human body partakes of the animal also, because biological evolution is also a scientific fact, right? We have evolved from lower forms of life. And somebody said very beautifully, all life is one. We think that, so evolution is for all life. So that's a very brilliant point, because actually biologists say that all life is one, because life feeds on life, etc. But the point is, we still partake of that animal nature. And so food, and then Sri Aurobindo says it is possible to train the body so that the dependence on food is reduced. So he talks about that. And then he says, but don't let's make a fetish out of it. Till the transformation happens, eating as we normally do is okay. Then he also talks about sex, because he says that's the way we know how to reproduce. We don't know how to reproduce in any other way. I think I have 5 minutes, no? So he talks about sex also, and he says how we have to spiritualize, not suppress or overcome sex. So it's all there, you can read it. And then he gradually talks about the different levels of the mind and the supramental manifestation. And the concluding part of the essay is this wonderful thing called the mind of light. And to me, just before he left his physical body, Sri Aurobindo is giving us another clue. And the clue is very simple. The clue is that this mind of ours is an ordinary mind, but we must aspire for the mind of light. And friends, I must tell you that I believe that the mind of light is available to us. It's not for the future, it's for us now. And if our aspiration is strong, and if we really try, even for a few moments in our 24-hour cycle, we can be in the mind of light. We can have that state of illumination or an illumined mind where we are quiet, we see things as they are, we are not disturbed mentally. And that mind of light is available to us. So even if we can't aspire for the supramental, that's a bit too much, but at least the mind of light. So Sri Aurobindo gives us something before he leaves, that the mind of light is the first step. Now, in the 4 minutes or so that I have left, I want to raise a few questions for all of us. And one of the questions that I want to raise is that why did Sri Aurobindo not talk about, and we have a scientist here, why didn't he talk about the role of science in transformation? Because he talks about yogic transformation. But now when you look at what we call transhumanism and posthumanism. See, these are two different things. Transhumanism is mostly scientific and technological. It's a form of scientific triumphalism, Sachi, that science can solve all our problems. So now we think we can live for 200 years. That's going to be a reality. The next generation may live for 200 years because of advancements in medical science, nanotechnology. If your heart is not good, you can get a new heart. You don't have to get a triple bypass put a couple of stents and wonder how long it's going to hold up. You know, stem cell research. There's incredible developments. And human life is going to be prolonged. It's already happening. In Pondicherry, it's happening through yoga. Everybody lives to be 100. Sadhaks, the average age is 100. But in USA, it's happening. Elsewhere, it's happening because of medical science. So this transhumanism also then leads you to other things like cyborgs. You know, you've seen these James Bond films with people with prosthetic arms and with hooks instead of arms. But you know, you can implant chips into yourself. Your brain is now half outside in the external drive. So she was saying that, you know, he wrote something 20 years ago and suddenly found it on his computer and he was delighted because it stores everything. So, I mean, I don't have to remember who wrote that book because I can check on the internet. Though, of course, Anandai will help me. But earlier you had to remember everything, you know, and all the Vedas were memorized. The Quran used to be memorized. Anybody who memorized the Quran was called the Hafiz. So you see, this memory now we don't need because it's all external memory. Half the mind is outside. So this transhumanism, and there's a man called Ray Kurzweil. So they use Moore's law. Moore's law is something used in computer chips that, you know, every 2.5 years, the chip will get smaller and twice as fast. So you're going to reach a point of singularity where there's an exponential growth. And we see that from very primitive computers which took up as much space as this whole room and were so heat causing. You know, you have to cool them down with air conditioners. Now a small phone in your pocket has much more memory and capacity than that. So there is this transhumanism, and another frontier is artificial intelligence, you know, where machines will overtake human beings in their capacity to think. You already know how True Blue, an IBM computer, defeated Kasparov. Yeah? So that's transhumanism. Now, posthumanism is something that's more philosophical and critical, and they're actually critiquing the transhumanists because they're saying there'll be the digital haves and the digital have-nots. So only rich people will get life enhancement, like cosmetic surgery, right? Have you seen a film Catwoman? You can see it, and you see there's a whole company that tries to make this cream which stops aging, you know, and actually it really destroys your cells, like this botulin. You know, most of these injections that the film stars use, you know, like Angelina Jolie, she's lost her facial expression because they actually inject toxins to take out the wrinkles, you know. You can read about all this. But rich people can, nowadays in Brazil, in California, nothing is real. You look at somebody, oh, you're so beautiful. But everything is unreal. The eyes are unreal, the eyelashes are unreal, the hair is unreal, the breasts are unreal, the nails are unreal, the teeth are unreal. It's all manufactured. It's available. You can do that. You can also now start choosing genetically what kind of child you want. If you believe in astrology, you can predict when they want to be born also. You can arrange a cesarean so that they get all the nakshatras, etc. So you see, the post-humanists are critiquing the transhumanists. I think I've exceeded my time, so I'll wind up in 2 minutes with the permission of the chair. You see, the post-humanists are saying this is another form of capitalist exploitation where some very rich people will have a wonderful life, they live forever, like vampires, they live forever. How? They drink the blood of others, right? So these rich people will have all kinds of implants, their body will be enhanced, right? Like, you see it in science fiction, we are students of literature. So in science fiction, there's a film called Elysium, you see? All the rich people go to this place called Elysium. It's in the space. And then they don't age, they have a machine. And all the poor people live on Earth. The Earth has become a slum. You know? We all are going to be living in a slum, and the rich people will live in outer space, in a beautiful artificial environment. So these are some scenarios of the future. So my question is, somehow Sri Aurobindo and the mother did a bit, but Sri Aurobindo didn't talk too much about science. And my question with which I'm going to end is this. You see, on the one hand, you have the great yogis, led by Sri Aurobindo and the mother, talking about the supramental manifestation and transformation of consciousness, new species, new race, new life, new consciousness, and beyond man, beyond the human, through yoga, through transformation. Now, what's interesting is, from those days when Sri Aurobindo was writing these articles, 1949-50, to now, so much has changed in the world of science. Now from this other side, from the side of science, technology on the one hand, and then philosophy. Philosophy meaning, l'avenir. Jacques Derrida talks about that future, l'avenir. Michel Foucault, they're destroying the idea of Renaissance humanism. Deleuze and Guattari, schizoanalysis. So there are three prongs: science and technology, continental philosophy and yoga. My question to all of us, for us to think about, is somehow are these three converging? So instead of singularity of Ray Kurzweil, maybe there's a convergence point where some trigger is going to happen. There'll be a spark across they haven't met as yet, but perhaps is it possible that the dream that Sri Aurobindo and the mother were talking about is now going to be actualized, or can only be actualized with a cooperation of a different kind between a new science and a new spirituality, right? A new social science and a new humanities, and a new philosophy and a new yoga. And that's the way in which the four aspects of Sri Aurobindo are going to come together for this future of which he was a great darshanik. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for keeping the time. I'm sure everybody would have noticed one amazing thing here, that a physiologist, a scientist speaking about poetry, a person of literature speaking about science and fiction, science and movie and technology. So I think Sri Aurobindo really brings science and spirituality together and makes it a delightful experience for all of us to understand that they are not two extremes or not two opposite things, but a continuum, a continuous chain where we have to understand where they meet, and maybe they meet in philosophy, the synthesis, or something we understand. I request the chair to give his comments.
I'm truly pleased to be here to chair the session where my friend Makarand spoke so well in his own characteristically conversational mode, full of wit and humor, and partly self-deprecatory as well. But before, I have a couple of things to say, not in the way of summing up or summarizing, because that would be an insult to the intelligence of the audience. Basically to say what the speaker has said, but I have a couple of new ideas in the way of making it complementary in both sense of the term, COMPLI and COMPLE. But before that, I think it will be unfair if we do not have a chance for question and answers. One or two maybe we should be able to take up. Anybody who has any questions? Yes.
Professor Paranjape, thank you for that. Professor Madhusudan Reddy in his book on Savitri has used a very beautiful phrase, that is spiritual aesthetics. And Professor Ramakrishna has just touched it. He just pointed out, while speaking about the poetic vision of Sri Aurobindo, he said it may be sattvic, associated with sattvic guna. Is it that, or is it just the glory and grandeur of the Manidvipa, or is it related to the four aspects of Kali, Saraswati, etc., or according to your mysticism, is there anything else embedded in this concept of spiritual aesthetics? Will you please elaborate?
Okay, thank you.